I had 11 physicians and not one of them could tell me why I wasn't sleeping. They came in pairs, mostly, because a single physician standing alone in front of a grieving king tends to run out of things to say. They took my pulse from both wrists at once, as if the truth might be hiding in the difference. They asked about my appetite in voices pitched the way you'd speak to a horse that might bolt. Then they left, and wrote things down. And I lay in the dark of the Ashmore Palace listening to the water clock in the hall mark off the hours since my wife had died. It had been 4 months, long enough that the court had stopped flinching when her name came up, and started flinching instead at how little I ate, how rarely I slept, how I'd taken to walking the cold corridors after midnight like a man checking locks that didn't need checking. My steward suggested a physician from the coast, my chancellor suggested prayer, my sister suggested, gently, that a king who does not eat is a king who cannot govern, and she was right, and I told her so, and kept not eating anyway. I found the under kitchen by accident the first night. I'd meant to walk to the observatory, but the servant's stair was closer and I took it without thinking, and at the bottom of it was heat and light and the smell of something with onions in it, and a woman standing at a scarred wooden table with her sleeves pushed up past her elbows. She didn't kneel. She looked at me the way you'd look at anyone who'd wandered in past midnight looking hollowed out, which is to say she looked concerned, not reverent, and she said, "You look like you haven't eaten since yesterday." I hadn't. I told her so, mostly because I was too tired to invent a better answer, and she made a small sound in her throat. Not pity, something closer to judgment, and pointed me at a stool with the handle of her wooden spoon. Her name was Senna Ashcombe, 62 years old, she told me later, though I'd have guessed less by her hands, which moved like a much younger woman's. She'd come to Corinthi space on a relief transport 11 years back, widowed, with nothing but a set of good knives and a recipe book with the spine taped twice. She cooked for the staff, the guards on the night rotation, the scullery girls, anyone too low in the palace's order to rate a seat in the grand kitchens upstairs. She did not know who I was, or she knew, in the way anyone in that palace knew their king's face from a coin, but it hadn't occurred to her yet that the two things, the coin and the man eating her stew at midnight, were the same fact. She set a bowl in front of me. Root vegetables, some dark grain I didn't recognize, bread with a crust that fought back. She didn't ask if it suited me. She sat down across the table with her own bowl and ate, and after a while she said, "My husband used to go quiet like you're going quiet. Wouldn't eat, wouldn't say why. You want to talk about it or you want to eat first?" Nobody in the palace had asked me that. They asked how I was feeling, which is a question built to be answered with a lie. She asked which order I wanted to do the two hard things in, and left the choice to me. I ate first. Then I talked, badly, about small things, the way my wife had hummed off key while she dressed, the argument we'd had the week before she died about nothing, about a window left open, an argument I would have given anything to have again. Senna didn't offer wisdom. She refilled my bowl and said, "That's the kind of thing that keeps, meaning the memory, not the argument." And I understood her, and it was the first thing anyone had said to me in 4 months that didn't feel like a bandage stretched too tight over a wound too deep for it. I came back the second night, and the third. I told myself each time that I would stop, that a king skulking down a servant's stair for stew was a habit I couldn't afford, and each time midnight came I found my feet on the stair anyway. Senna kept a pot going most nights regardless. For the late rotation guards, she said, not for me. And she never once made it feel like an occasion when I appeared. She never once stood when I entered, never once called me anything but you, and I found I preferred it to every title I'd worn since I was 19. She had opinions about food the way some men have opinions about scripture. Bread had to be torn, never cut, because a knife on good bread was an insult to the baker. Broth needed a full day, not an afternoon, or you were only pretending at broth. She fed me a soup the color of rust one night, thick with some root I didn't have a name for, and told me it was what she'd made for her husband on the nights his own grief sat on him like a wet coat. A plain thing, made plainer on purpose, because a grieving man doesn't need seasoning. He needs weight in his stomach and someone across the table who isn't afraid of his silence. On the 6th night, one of the scullery girls came down early for her shift, and saw me at the table and went the color of ash, and started to drop into a bow so deep I thought she might tip over, and Senna said, without looking up from the pot, "He's eating, Mira. Sit down or go back up, but don't make a production of it." And that was the end of the matter. The girl sat down. Nobody made a production of it again. It was the 9th night that Senna finally asked, plainly, whether I was the king, or merely looked remarkably like him, and I said I was, and braced for the shift in her, the flinch, the sudden formality, the bowl set down with 2 hands instead of 1. It didn't come. She looked at me for a long moment, the way you'd look at a piece of meat to see if it had turned. And then she said, "Well, that explains why you eat like someone's watching," and pushed the bread closer to my side of the table. I told my physicians on the 10th day that I no longer required their evening visits. I did not tell them why. It would have sounded, to men trained to look for symptoms, like a symptom. The king has taken to eating in the servant's kitchen at midnight with a widow from a relief transport. Please advise. There was no advising it. There was only the fact that I slept, that week, for the first time since the funeral, 4 hours straight, and woke without the water clock's count sitting on my chest like a stone. My chancellor found out eventually, chancellors always do, and came to me carefully. "The way you approach a man you suspect might be embarrassed to be caught." He asked, delicately, whether I intended to elevate the cook, give her rooms in the upper wing, a title, recognition befitting what she'd done for the crown's health, since apparently that was a thing that could be filed and accounted for now. I asked Senna that same week, sitting at her scarred table, whether she wanted any of it. Rooms, a title, recognition. She laughed, not unkindly, but the way you laugh at a question that's missed the point entirely. "I've got a kitchen," she said. "I've got a table. If you want to keep coming down here and eating what everyone else eats, you're welcome at it, same as always. But I'm not moving upstairs to cook you something fancy off a card some steward wrote up. That's not what fixed you, and you know it." I asked her, once, why she wouldn't take the rooms upstairs. The easier work. The recognition that would have set her family, what remained of it, a nephew on a farming moon 2 systems out, comfortably for the rest of their lives. She considered the question longer than she considered most things. "Because upstairs I'd be cooking for the king," she said. "Down here, I'm just feeding a man who forgets to eat. I like the second job better. It's the only one where you sit at my table instead of the other way around." She was right. And I did know it, and so nothing changed, formally. No announcement, no title. The court still doesn't quite know what to call what happens most nights after the last torch upstairs is banked. Only that the king goes missing after midnight and comes back steadier than he left, and that a woman named Senna Ashcombe still runs the under kitchen exactly as she always has, sleeves pushed up, judging every hollow-eyed guard and scullery girl and, on plenty of nights, their king, with the same flat, unimpressed affection. My grief didn't leave. I don't think it was ever going to, and I've stopped expecting it to. But there is a difference between carrying a thing alone in a cold hallway at 3 in the morning and carrying it across a scarred table from someone who refills your bowl without being asked and tells you, plainly, that it's the kind of thing that keeps. 11 physicians looked for what was wrong with me and wrote down what they found. Senna never once asked what was wrong. She just set a place at the table and left it set, and that was the whole of the cure.